Kenneth Walker is officially doubtful. Joe Mixon and Dameon Pierce, they're both out. And lots of other relevant injuries that are affecting the running backs in these matchups this week. That's why we wait till the end of the week to go through every matchup and identify the must start and sit running backs. And that's exactly what we're doing today. And I'm one of the only fantasy YouTubers working on a Saturday. So go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, this first matchup here, the Giants at the Browns, there's not a single must-start running back in here. The one guy who we know is going to handle the entire workload is Devin Singletary. And he's ironically my least favorite guy in this matchup. His matchup against the Browns defense, that's a pretty tough one, man. The Giants are going to have very few opportunities for Devin Singletary to be a legit must-start guy in fantasy football. And even then, I don't even know if I would put him in must-start territory because this offense is just really bad. And then the two guys, I think Jerome Ford, I'd still prefer him in Cleveland over D'Onta Foreman. Even though Foreman did lead the team in touches last week, Jerome Ford was really good on all his opportunities. So I'm like, what are the chances he gets some back? Like, I think that he would get some back after he was really good on less work. Whereas D'Onta Foreman, I don't doubt that he could be a red zone guy, carry the ball for them at the goal line. But the reality is, how often are they going to get down there in the end zone? So it's like, I don't think it's going to be that many times that Cleveland is down there at the red zone in goal line rushing opportunities. So I ultimately still do prefer Ford over D'Onta Foreman, but I do think Foreman is flexible. Tyrone Tracy Jr., for the Giants, you go ahead and you sit him until further notice. The Philadelphia Eagles at the New Orleans Saints is our next matchup. You fire up Saquon Barkley, you fire up Alvin Kamara. Both of these guys are top 3 running backs in fantasy football. And honestly, depending on the Breece Hall status moving forward with Braylon Allen, one of these guys could easily become the running back 1. And it's a great matchup here for both of these teams. The Eagles are obviously maybe a better run defense than a pass defense, but Kamara's going to get touches either way. His floor is really safe. And in Saquon's matchup against the Saints, not particularly strong, but again, Saquon is just really looking good behind that offensive line. I think he's definitely matchup proof for sure. And then everybody else is irrelevant because these two guys are, of course, the stars of the freaking show. The Houston Texans at the Minnesota Vikings is our next matchup here. And again, we're in no must-start territory. We're honestly in no man's land. Because Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler led the team in carries and yardage last week versus the 49ers. So it's like, against another stout run defense against the Texans, I don't love his chances. You know, I think he's definitely going to be flexible because of the pass catching upside, and I still do prefer him over Cam Akers. Cam Akers, of course, I alluded to it in the intro. Joe Mixon, I think he's real doubtful as of right now, and Dameon Pierce is out. That's Cam Akers' backfield. Now, the question ultimately, where it's a good time to talk about it, is who do you start Cam Akers over? I wouldn't start him over Aaron Jones. I wouldn't start him over Devin Singletary. I think this is just the reality with Cam Akers, is that he's going up against a really tough defense with Minnesota as well. And I don't rule out the fact that there could be some Dare Ogunbowale in here. That's why he's also flexible. So I think Cam Akers ultimately leads the backfield, but don't be surprised if Dare Ogunbowale is involved in this offense. That's why he's flexible. And then everybody else, I don't think Ty Chandler is going to be a start against the Texans defense. I just don't think he's really playable yet until we see him. Really, what he's going to have to do is go up against a really cushy matchup or start to monopolize the carries a little bit more in his favor. And then, of course, Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, they're out. Denver Broncos at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is our next matchup here. And again, no man's land. Rachaad White is taken off the injury report, but he was limited in practice this week, and he looks horrible. I mean, that dude, of course, he relies on targets. And last week, he didn't get them. Now, he was in and out of that matchup a little bit, so how seriously can we take that threat from Bucky Irving? I think it's credible. Bucky Irving has been so much better than Rachaad White on the ground, so I'm not leaving the door. I'm not closing the door on Bucky Irving potentially taking over running back duties this week. Don't know if it's going to happen. Probably need to see a little bit more. The Buccaneers do, but in this matchup against the Broncos, not an easy matchup for Rachaad White. So he's flexible at best, and Bucky Irving is too. He's a lower end option, and I wouldn't play him over Javonte because even though Javonte's offense is miserable right now, Denver's offense is horrible. And Javonte did share touches with Jaleel McLaughlin in week 1. My prediction came true about Jaleel McLaughlin in week 2. He was in the doghouse with Sean Payton. So I think I still prefer Javonte Williams this week. And I do prefer him over Bucky Irving because I do think he'll out-touch Bucky Irving in this matchup. And then Julian McLaughlin, I need to sit him until I see further involvement again in this offense because it already sucks. And unless he's getting like 10 touches a game, he's not going to be very valuable in fantasy. The Green Bay Packers at the Tennessee Titans this week. Now, Josh Jacobs, there's not a question. You fire the dude up. He had 30 plus carries last week, just didn't get into the end zone. That's why people were still disappointed with him. It's like, wake up and just look at the volume. Josh Jacobs is going to get in the end zone at some point, especially when Jordan Love comes back, and maybe he does this week. He's questionable. But Josh Jacobs, either way, that dude is so must start. You wouldn't even believe it. Tony Pollard is definitely a must start for me too. Tyjae Spears is questionable. Maybe he plays, maybe he doesn't. Tyjae Spears, I ultimately just don't think, even if he does play, he's eaten into enough of Pollard's workload for me to be realistically concerned. Pollard looks really good this year. He's really the best offensive playmaker they have outside of Calvin Ridley. So at this point, I would play Tony Pollard 8 out of 10 situations. And then everybody else is not flexible, not playable. Like I said, Tyjae may or may not play. Even if he does, don't play him. And then Emmanuel Wilson is the new RB2 for Green Bay. Don't play him because Josh Jacobs has a monopoly on that Green Bay backfield. Now, the next matchup here, the Chicago Bears at the Indianapolis Colts. Jonathan Taylor is still a must start. Look, the guy has looked really good. I mean, he's getting the job done. He's averaging over 5 yards per carry. He's looking really good. The problem is his workload. And this matchup isn't particularly great, but that being said, Taylor's the best offensive playmaker they've got in Indianapolis right now. Shaky Anthony Richardson, shaky receiving core. You got to play Jonathan Taylor, man. And then DeAndre Swift, man, avoid this guy if you can. This guy looks terrible in this offense. It's such a bad fit. I mean, Swift, I just don't think he's that great of a player anyways. And Khalil Herbert, for that reason, I think he's low flexible, like low end flexible. But DeAndre Swift, not much better off. This dude is not getting targets, which he really needs to get fantasy upside. And this guy looks horrific running the ball. It's just a bad situation in Chicago. And then obviously you don't play Trey Sermon. Jonathan Taylor's back up. Los Angeles Chargers at the Pittsburgh Steelers. This game is going to be run heavy. Get ready to watch a physical, brutal football game. That's what I live for. I love the physical games like this. Listen, J.K. Dobbins is must start. For me, it's not a question. And let me clarify what I mean by that. I think people are right to ask questions about J.K. against a tough defense this week, which the Steelers are. My rationale is this. J.K. Dobbins is leading the team right now in carries, even though Gus Edwards is not irrelevant. But J.K. Dobbins looks so good right now in fantasy that I just can't imagine taking him off when he's this hot. So maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but J.K. Dobbins for me is not leaving my lineup this week. Najee's my favorite flex of the bunch because he has a further grip on that backfield than Gus does, obviously, with JK. So ultimately, I do prefer the guy who has the stronger grip on his own backfield, and that is Najee Harris. But he's not very high upside, and Gus just hasn't proven to be yet either. Now, one of these weeks, Gus will get in the end zone, but so will Najee Harris. So one of these two guys definitely could, and Jaylen Warren was more involved last week, so I think he's going to continue to get more involved and become more flexible as well. So legitimately, all four of these running backs can be playing. It's definitely possible, and I would go ahead and sit everybody else. Cordarrelle Patterson's a no, and Kamani Vidal is a no. The Miami Dolphins at the Seattle Seahawks is our next matchup here, and I think Devon Achane, don't worry about it, man. That dude played the game with Skylar Thompson last week, and as soon as Skylar Thompson came in, he was like his number one target. So he's not all of a sudden just losing involvement in this Miami offense just because it's Skylar Thompson. He's going to be looking for Devon Achane a bunch. So Achane is locked and loaded again this week. Zach Charbonnet, I would say most situations I would be playing Zach Charbonnet. Now the question ultimately is like, would you play Zach Charbonnet over J.K. Dobbins? I'd play J.K. personally. Would you play Zach Charbonnet over somebody like a Jordan Mason, who we'll get to in a little bit? Definitely would play Jordan Mason. But if we're talking about Zach Charbonnet versus Rachaad White, I'm taking Zach Charbonnet. I think the matchup is really good against Miami's defense. James Cook just ripped him up last week, so I think Charbonnet is a good must start with Kenneth Walker. Officially doubtful, he's obviously not playing. And then Jeff Wilson, even though he's off the injury report, I just don't trust another Miami Dolphins running back right now, and that goes with Jalen Wright as well. The Carolina Panthers at the Las Vegas Raiders this week. Look, Zamir White, I don't want to admit it, but I have to the audience because I want to be authentic about it. Zamir White is low-key a high-end flex option. I mean, he's taken on the Carolina Panthers in Las Vegas this week, and every running back has had success against Carolina really over the past, year. So I just think Zamir White, if there's ever a game where he can provide legit fantasy upside, it's this game. And if he doesn't, you may as well cut him. I mean, he's going to be bad, and he won't have much value anywhere else. Chuba Hubbard, I think, is flexible. The one thing I'm just hoping privately, not really privately, but as a guy who was in on Chuba Hubbard before the start of the season, I'm hoping Andy Dalton can free up Chuba enough to where teams don't feel like they have to stack the box. With Bryce, there was no other option. Chuba still played really well last week, so I've got some hope for Chuba, but it's definitely tempered. And then Miles Sanders, you obviously don't play him. Madison, I'm just not playing him either this week. The San Francisco 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, this matchup is a jumbled mess. The running backs, obviously McCaffrey's out, so Jordan Mason has been elite in fantasy. You don't sit Jordan Mason under any circumstances, especially with George Kittle and Debo now out too. And then Kyron, I got to tell you, Kyron's must start still because he's one of the only ones left, but I'm a little worried. It's not just that they don't have weapons outside of him. It's also their offensive line stinks. That's helping him average less than 3 yards per carry. So Kyron just hasn't looked good. His weeks are getting saved by touchdowns. And against the stout 49ers defense, I'm worried. But obviously, I still think he's a must start because he is monopolizing that backfield right now. And he is one of the last weapons they've got. And then I would bench everybody else. Corum, I just need to see more first. Ronnie Rivers, not going to play him. And then Isaac Guerrero, the backup for Jordan Mason, not going to play him either. The Detroit Lions at the Arizona Cardinals this week. You fire up these running backs too, man. Jahmyr Gibbs, James Conner, David Montgomery. You don't really sit a Lions running back. You just don't. David Montgomery is averaging 15 fantasy points per game basically in all formats. Jahmyr Gibbs is right there with him. They're both really good in fantasy. And then James Conner has been legit in fantasy as well. Dude's averaging 18 fantasy points per game. So James Conner, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, there's just no chance you sit him, especially when this matchup has a high over-under as you can see on the screen. And then Trey Benson, not worried about him. It's James Conner season in Arizona. The Baltimore Ravens at the Dallas Cowboys this week. Derrick Henry remains must start. Because I said this earlier on the running back rankings, I'm worried about Henry because he is touchdown dependent. He's not getting to be very efficient because this offensive line is failing him. And the other reality with it is that he's not getting the amount of carries he used to get. Now, the one thing that the reason I'm not super worried about Henry is because I don't think the running back carries at the goal line are all of a sudden going away. I think he's got that pretty much locked and loaded, whether Justice Hill is on the field some snaps or not. They're putting Derrick Henry on the goal line because he's built for it. So I'm not worried about it ultimately. And in a week where I think Baltimore may very well have their way with Dallas, I'm playing Derrick Henry for sure. And then Rico Dowdle and Zeke, they're both flexible. I prefer Rico at this point. Rico out-touched Zeke last week, and we'll see if that keeps up. But Rico is the younger player. Zeke just doesn't have that explosion anymore. So take a chance. This one's a gut call for everybody out there. My gut's telling me Rico Dowdle. And Justice Hill, you just don't play him right now. The Kansas City Chiefs at the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday Night Football. Bijan's obviously must start. This dude just hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. And obviously people are upset about that. And I understand why, but this guy's workload is there. He's averaging 20 plus touches a game. The offense runs through him. That's the reality here. So Bijan will get in the end zone at some point. It's just a matter of time. And then Carson Steele is my preferred guy over Samaje Perine, and I'll explain why. Carson Steele, there's two ways you can think about this, right? Carson, would you rather have the guy who's going to handle the carries in this backfield, or would you rather have the guy who's going to handle the receptions? Now, a lot of people will say Samaje Perine because he will handle the receptions. I agree he will. But I think a lot of people have the memory of Jerick McKinnon in their heads and say Samaje Perine is going to fill that role. He's going to fill the role, but how would you know if he's going to be as successful? McKinnon was actually a really good player. I don't think Samaje Perine's that player. So Carson Steele, I would just rather take the shot on the younger player who looked good in the preseason, didn't have the greatest game in week 2, but I'd rather take the shot on the guy who's an aggressive runner, which is what they want. With Isaiah Pacheco, they missed that, so they want to fill that hole with an aggressive runner, and Carson Steele is that. So I would just personally rather take the carry guy when I really don't believe in the reception guy personally. But again, judgment call, you guys make your own decision. Tyler Algier, I'm just not playing him right now. And then Kareem Hunt, do not play him. The guy's on the practice squad right now. He's not even getting a helmet this week. We'll reevaluate it in a week, but he's not playing this week, so there's no reason to play him. The Jacksonville Jaguars at the Buffalo Bills. James Cook, fire him up. There's no reason to talk about it. Honestly, he's a top 5 back, arguably right now. I mean, James Cook's elite. Travis Etienne is in a similar position as Kyron. Must start because I think he's probably the most important piece on this offense right now, especially with Tank Bigsby's injury, but he does not look particularly good. Averaging less than 4 yards per carry on like 12.5 carries for 2 weeks. It's not looking good. He's getting saved by reception work and touchdowns. So Etienne, just because of volume and upside with touchdowns, is definitely a must start, but he's a lower end option. And then Tank, like I said, he's questionable heading into the week. Ray Davis, you don't play him because James Cook has a full grip on this backfield in Buffalo. And the last matchup of the week, the second Monday night game. Hate these matchups. The Washington Commanders at the Cincinnati Bengals. Brian Robinson is a must start. That guy is really good in fantasy. Like, he may have a couple stinker weeks. Believe in the workload and believe in the efficiency. That efficiency is here to stay. He's going to be really efficient this year because of Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels is allowing Brian Robinson to have a running back field when he gets the ball that is not they don't have the box stacked against them because Jaden Daniels could run and defenses have to respect that run. Brian Robinson Jr. is going to have a big boom game at some point. Maybe it's against the Cincinnati Bengals' bad defense. Zach Moss, I actually think is a pretty high-end flex play. The Washington Commanders defense is horrible. I think the Bengals win this game, and they could get out to an early lead where they use Zach Moss. And of course, Zach Moss is the running back one, which is why I would say sit Chase Brown because he's getting a touch basically every third or fourth time Zach Moss touches the ball. So Chase Brown is kind of not irrelevant. Keep your eye on him. Don't cut him, but just don't play him right now. And I think Zach Moss is definitely a high upside guy. And I would say Eckler, he's been more involved than I thought he would. I mean, he's involved on the pass game. He's getting some rushes, but his draw is, of course, the pass game still. So I think he's flexible, but I prefer Zach Moss this week. So let me know how your team is looking so far this week. And if you want to see the must-start and sit wide receivers for this week, click on this video right here.